Sustainable Milton event. My name is Wendy Roberts. I'm the Vice Chair of Sustainable Milton, and I am standing in tonight for Mary Brown, our events coordinator. Mary is the inspiration and organizer extraordinaire behind all of our events, including this one, but unfortunately she's not able to join us this evening. I have 3 housekeeping items. You've likely noticed the video equipment. The speaker and panelists will be videotaped. Members of the audience will be invited later to ask questions. Although those asking the questions will be heard on video, they will not appear on camera. I think I have that right.
We'll try that. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Our volunteers, you've seen being very helpful this evening. They are all wearing name tags, and they'll be happy to assist you with, there's free hot drinks, coffee and tea, and please help yourself to water and cookies. We may have to refresh the cookies. I think we had some hungry folks come tonight. Just so you know, the washroom is outside this door and to your right. So I'd like to begin tonight's event by honoring those whose lands we are on. As a community, we have the responsibility to honor, care for, and respect the land, water, air, fire, animals, plants, and our ancestors. The Anishinaabe peoples have lived on this land for millennia, and we would like to acknowledge their direct descendants, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as the rightful caretakers and title holders of this land upon which we live, work, and conduct ourselves. We acknowledge our treaty relationship and responsibilities to both the land and these original peoples. It is in the spirit and intent of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, whereby we will collectively care for and respect the land, water, animals, and each other, in the interests of peace and friendship, and for the benefit not only for ourselves, but also for our future generations. This Friday, September 30th, is National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Grandmother's Voice, an urban Indigenous center in Milton, is inviting the community, so all of us, to join them in honoring the children in a journey from truth to reconciliation. There will be 2 virtual live sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and 2 walks, also one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The walks will start at the center, which is located at Country Heritage Park, just up the road on Tremaine. If you want more information, there is some at the table just to my left. I encourage you to join Grandmother's Voice in honoring and remembering the children, either in person or virtually. So I'd now like to talk a very little bit about Sustainable Milton and how we got here. Sustainable Milton is a relatively young organization. We're approximately 2.5 years old. In late 2019, about a dozen of us met after a disappointing budget vote by Milton's Town Council. It was disappointing in that, despite having declared a climate emergency just months earlier, Council approved a budget that fell far short of what was needed to achieve any meaningful climate change action. So we decided Council needs regular and vocal reminding that simply declaring a climate emergency is not enough. To have any meaningful impact, Council needs to ensure staff have the necessary resources, set climate targets and performance measures, and engage the community in sustainability, education, and initiatives. So Sustainable Milton was formed to be that reminder, that voice, and to inspire Milton residents to get involved in helping to make Milton a more resilient and sustainable community. Tonight's event is the 5th in our series of 6 sustainability lectures. Past lectures have included talks about protecting our water, the importance of bats in maintaining a healthy ecosystem, and on-site demonstrations about backyard composting and native plant gardening. It is our hope that you come away from these sessions with some concrete ways of how you can personally act to protect Mother Earth. In the words of Jane Goodall, every single person makes some impact on the planet every single day. We can choose what sort of difference we make. So I'm now going to turn to tonight's speaker and panelists. Jim Fielders, and I'll get people to give a little wave when I mention your name, but Jim Fielders, a professional engineer who has spent his career involved with green home retrofits, will tell us about how we can heat our homes without burning fossil fuels. He will speak about the challenges, the costs, the results, and the environmental impact of transitioning to a heat pump system. Jim has been the president of Jade Environmental Services for the past 17 years. He has served as the director of the board of Burlington Green and is currently a Burlington Green sponsor. In 2005, Jim took the federal government's 1-ton challenge and decided he had to do something about climate change. He started a renewable energy business, bought a Prius, and decided to build a green home in Burlington. That home, constructed in 2010, is comfortable, eco-friendly, and energy efficient and produces, get this, 90% less carbon emissions than the surrounding homes. Jim gives tours regularly, including for the Ontario Sustainability Energy Association's Open Green Doors event every fall. Having worked as a consultant for clients under the FIT and microfit solar electric programs, Jim has transitioned into providing assistance and homeowners wanting to reduce energy use and cost while also reducing carbon emissions. Following his presentation, Jim will engage our 3 panelists who will share their experience with home retrofits to reduce their carbon footprint. Our panelists are Louise Knox, Art Jansen, and Ed Marion. Louise is a retiree who moved to Guelph 4 years ago, taking advantage of the move to buy a small home which could benefit from retrofits to reduce her carbon footprint. Louise spent 12 years of her professional life working in the environmental assessment field with the federal government and 11 years with Environment Canada's Great Lakes program. Art is a co-founder of Halton Action for Climate Emergency Now, or HASTEN. Hart and his partner Daniela built a passive house semi in Oakville in 2013, which they continue to live in. The 2,200 square foot house emits about a half a ton carbon annually, and that's compared to an average of 4 to 5 tons of other houses of that size. Again, quite significant. Hart has been active on the climate advocacy front in Oakville and in Halton generally for the past 15 years. And he has owned an electric Kia Soul for the past 5 years. Now Ed. Ed is the founder of Passive House Ontario, a consulting firm that specializes in high performance and passive buildings. Ed spent most of the 2000s working in custom home construction and renovation. In 2008, he came across an article, Houses You Can Heat with a Hairdryer, that literally changed his life. The article led him to his first Passive House Institute US, or FIAS, conference in 2008, and shortly thereafter he completed the FIAS Certified Consultants course. Although currently focused on passive housing consultant, Ed has significant construction experience and recently completed the FIAS Passive House Builder training to stay current with evolving best practices. Ed is using his passive house knowledge and integrated project design to improve building practices in Ontario. Ed holds a degree in business and economics and is a keen amateur musician. So we'll be finished early. We're going to ask Ed to sing us a few songs. So a very impressive lineup indeed. And Jim, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Technical detail, I'm looking hard to hit the space bar every time the screen goes dead. And because the room is fairly reverberant, we're trying to do a recording that eliminates the reverberation through the microphone up against the speaker there. So all the speakers, including me, will talk as closely to the mic as I can, so we get enough volume and less background sound. Hit it hard. So when you on the timetable, I'll talk and then we'll have the panel discussion and then you're free to ask questions and we can hang around after 8:30. They won't kick us out, so if anybody has specific questions, feel free to come up. So what is climate change all about and what can the average homeowner or tenant do? Because the earth is heating up more quickly than in the past, weather has become more extreme. Just watch the news. It is more difficult now to adapt in enough time. The good news is that there is a solution for every home to reduce carbon emissions at a reasonable cost and save money. In doing our work, we use instruments to measure different environmental parameters like carbon dioxide and volatile organic compounds. My student, Al, where did he go? He's going to pass out pass around the instruments we have here.
Find it. Okay.
Anyway, so I'm going to pass both a carbon dioxide detector and an air quality detector. Now these used to cost hundreds of dollars. Now they're under the $50 mark, but they're not that accurate. So there's one that when it's got a color scale on it as well as numbers, it may start beeping and saying, everybody clear out because the carbon dioxide is off the charts. That's an error, so what we do then is we just shut it off and turn it back on. Then I've got a couple of thermostats that are different ones for different applications, both wall-mounted ones and then these are remote ones. Okay, you can start with the first one. This is a slide that was done by a group in Toronto, and it's about 12 years old now, but I love it because I think it's graphically pretty good. It shows you the average single-family home carbon production of just under 21 tons a year. Of that, half is transportation, so that includes you going back and forth to work and going on vacation and flying all around the world. But we're going to focus on energy here. Need another hand here. So the energy component, which is your electricity and natural gas, it accounts for just under about a third of your carbon production. I'm going to show you what some of our customers have done. And the important thing is every job is different. So there, as I say, there's a solution for everybody. But first of all, just quickly, people get confused about heat pumps. There are 3 types, and we're looking at air source heat pumps. You've probably heard about geothermal, takes heat from the ground. That's very expensive because that piping in the ground could be $15,000, $20,000. So you eliminate that cost right off the bat with air source, and people think it doesn't work down into the cold temperatures, but most of them do. So the standard American that was developed in the 80s still only works down to about -4, just below freezing. My brother's got one, he's up on a farm in Peterborough, and he's got an electric furnace and a heat pump, so he gets the cooling that he likes, and it helps with the heating, but he uses his wood stove most of the time. Then the Japanese started this. It was actually Panasonic was a pioneer in this, 20, 30 years ago, and they came up with heat pumps that work down to about -15. In Toronto, the design limit is -19, so you couldn't get a building permit if you put that one in only. So that can be worked as a hybrid to add on to an existing system. So you can do heating and cooling. You've heard of the terms mini splits. So then we have the cold climate air source heat pump that works down to about -25 or 30, and you don't need any backup. That's what I've got in my house. This is the first job we did in this area. It was in Milton on a rural property. And that's a 4-ton unit. This was a fairly large house. People had just bought it from previous owners that had a big propane furnace in it, and they wanted cooling, so they decided to go with the heat pump. That one, now this was in 2018, just when I guess COVID was starting, was $1,700 installed, and they were saving just under $3,000 in propane costs, and 3,460 kilograms of carbon is their annual savings. So this was a fairly simple installation. This is in the ground, the basement kind of finished area. They had a kitchen there, and then a furnace room, and they just ran the refrigerant lines through the ceiling without having to open any ceilings or anything. The contractor was great. So he ran it out to the outdoor unit, and then did the wiring, which isn't shown here. And that's the propane tank that they've been using. Now this is Oakville. This happens to be Ed's sister's place. So this is Panasonic, again I mentioned Panasonic. So this is one that works -15. It's an outdoor mounted on the outside, and it runs the refrigerant lines. You can't see the lower one, goes into the living room and then up to the bedrooms. So they had no cooling before this, and now they do. It cost about $10,000 installed, and $600 annual savings. It doesn't sound like a lot compared to the last one, but they were already on electricity, which, as you know, in Ontario is pretty clean, and just under 200 kilograms of carbon. So these are the inside wall mount units in different rooms. This is my house. I built it in 2010. It's got the Mitsubishi Zuba, which apparently is considered the Cadillac, and it works to -30 with no backup. At that time, it was $15,000. Now I just did a quote on a job for $17,000, so in 12 years they haven't come up too much. And compared to mine, I built this house with a natural gas furnace and regular air conditioner. I projected I was going to save $3,000 a year. Now, I made this projection 12 years ago, and after I moved in, could you pass the others around? Excuse me, just start passing them all around. So I haven't gone back and looked at my actual energy costs, although I do keep track of everything. And then I'm saving 4,800 kilograms of carbon. That's the outdoor unit. It's like similar to the double fan one at the job in Milton. And that's the inside box, which has got a blower fan in it, the coil that changes the heat, and the electrical controls. This was one in Burlington, where they had the homeowner had taken advantage of grants. He got his basement spray foamed, and he's got solar panels on the roof, which are a little tricky to see, but they're just up there. So then he's got also an Ecobee smart thermostat, so you can turn the heat up or down when he's sitting on the beach in Florida before he gets on the plane. So this was $4,900 installed because he kept his fairly new Lennox furnace. And because he had a high efficiency furnace, again, he wasn't saving too much in annual savings, and he'd already reduced his heat loss to a point where he wouldn't save much more. Anyway, he was doing this because he wanted to get close to net zero. But even just reducing the furnace gas amount, you save 4,800 kilograms of carbon. And if you notice, this is mounted on the wall because these units work in the winter, and you know we're going to have shortly in Canada is snow. And that's the inside unit with the coil that goes above a regular furnace. This is his existing furnace. This is the refrigerant line coming in. It's still got insulation that has to be finalized there. This happens to be Louise's house in Guelph. It's a semi-detached. And when she bought it, she realized the furnace and air conditioner were coming towards the end of their useful life. So what Louise decided was to do to go with the hybrid, but get a new gas furnace as well. So we didn't get the top-of-the-line gas furnace. We just got a basic one, but it turns out it only runs about 5% of the time. But it's good if the power goes out. You can power a gas furnace off a battery backup unit. I've got one sitting in front of George there on the floor that will power the electronics to run the furnace. So this isn't my latest slide, I'm sorry. Louise, it was 74?
7,400.
7,400. Even when I saved the font, I need something. Anyway, you're saving about 400 in annual fuel costs and over 2,000 kilograms of carbon. That's the outside unit, again, mounted where the old air conditioner was. And inside is the furnace. And it's high efficiency, as you know, you have both intake and exhaust that are piped to the outside wall. And she also switched to an electric water heater. And this little box here on the wall is the control, it's called the interface, to make the heat pump talk to the furnace and talk to the thermostat. And that's critical in this product line because it'll work with any furnace. Across the street, and I'm in downtown Burlington, and there was a 1914 old home, built in 1914. It had hot water rad heating, and the boiler just died on it, and they had no cooling. It was owned by someone who inherited it from his parents, and he was living in the States, so he was renting it out. So we put in this cold climate multi-port heat pump. So now this is getting expensive. It costs $20,000, but there's we've got $600 in annual savings and under 4,000 kilograms of carbon. This is the outdoor unit. So you can see there's two lines going into the basement and then one going up to the attic. And where the old hot water rads were, they took them out and put in these floor mount units. And up in the attic, you can see those circular vents. Those are the supply for the 3 bedrooms and bathroom. And up in the attic, it wasn't a big space, but we were able to fit in this heat pump unit there. And then you see the silver-coated ducts that go into different rooms. And after this picture was taken, we put another 2 feet of insulation all over this. So when you look at what is the best way to go in terms of cost effectiveness and carbon reduction, this is a little confusing, but I'll just go through it quickly. That if you start off with an existing home producing about 7 tons of carbon, the first thing you do is you put in a hybrid heat pump. Now the reason I'm doing that is because you get a big savings right off the bat, and then after that you can do insulation and air sealing, and that can, mainly in the attic and the basement, and that'll give you a reduction, and there are grants for these. Then I go to an electric water heater, and this is what Louise did, and you'll notice that the annual cost went up a bit. That's going to change in the future, but this is what happened years ago. Then you can insulate your exterior walls, which can get expensive, and then put in new doors and windows, which is even more expensive, and finally put in solar. At this time, you're using hardly any power, so the solar can take over.
Can I have a question? Why you're insulating later? Why not first?
Just because you don't have to, but just because you get the best immediate response. But it's not required. That's just the way I feel people should go. And the city of Hamilton is taking this approach as well. But we'll let you ask some questions later. So really, the advantage of the hybrid heat pump is they call it the best bang for your buck. It's very effective in carbon reduction. Just by switching, you can save 70 or 80% of the heating costs. Now that's not the total cost of the house, but the heating component. And it will use either a new or existing, either natural gas, oil, or electric furnace. And then it adds or replaces, if you've got one, the old air conditioner with a refrigerant coil that goes above the furnace. And then you replace the outdoor unit with the units that you've seen. So this is a schematic that shows the components, and so here's a furnace, and that's the quality you put in, thermostat, the outside unit, and your electrical panel. The key is this, I call it a control panel, some people call it an interface. So it's a computer that lets everything talk to one another. So how do you save money and carbon? I didn't think of this before, but wind is renewable energy, sun is renewable energy, wave, tides. Well, so is air. So we're taking heat out of the air to heat our homes and cool them. In the winter, by dumping the heat from the home outside. And with air source heat pumps, there's a 3-to-1 ratio that for every kilowatt of energy you purchase, it puts out 3. So you get 2 from the air, and it's all 300% efficient. This is a diagram showing that on the left, the power's going in, on the right 3 times as much as coming out because you're getting the 2 from the air. So typically, and every case is different, you'll see that it will cost you about $6,000 to $8,000 to install with an existing furnace. You'll save $200 to $400 in operating energy costs and 2 to 4.5 tons of carbon. But what's going to happen in 15 years? We know carbon tax, although it's being debated, as you know, may not be around, but assuming it is, I looked at the next 15 years, and the cost of now a new gas furnace and AC, and I'm not talking about the barn basement, I'm just talking about the same quality as you would get in a heat pump. So that's going to cost you about $12,000, and your operating costs over 15 years are going to be like $37,000. If you go to the hybrid and put in a new furnace like Louise did, it's about $10,000, and it's going to be 33 or 4,000 over that period. Then the next step is you can also go to an electric heater. So in this case, you get a box with a fan in it, and a coil, and an electric heater when it goes below -15. So it's about the same cost installed. And the operating cost is a little more because you're all electric. You don't get that advantage of some gas. And then if you go to the hyper heat pump, as I've got, it's a little more expensive. I don't know why I'm shaking here. But the 15-year cost is only $25,000. So it's about $10,000 cheaper than if you went with.
Can I ask a question? How did you infer that the hybrid heat pump and the gas furnace are less in terms of acquisition costs compared to gas furnace AC? How did you get to that?
Well, I've got lots of data that I've analyzed. I could talk to you later about that because there's a lot of information that went into producing this simple slide. So now there are rebates of up to $5,000 for hybrid heat pumps. Some ones don't qualify, but most do. So the real cold climate ones are eligible, but the hybrid ones, you may or may not get it. It keeps changing. We keep getting notices from NRCan. A big question comes up, do I have to upgrade my panel? Because that could be a couple $1,000s. Generally, the answer is no. There is the Electrical Safety Association has a program that lets you calculate the load on your panel. It's very confusing. I programmed it myself into Excel, and I still have trouble with it. Anyway, the bottom line is usually a 100-amp panel is sufficient. If you still keep a gas water heater and you don't have a level 2 EV charger. It turns out that if you do other things like going with a hybrid water heater and a hybrid clothes dryer, they're called condenser dryers, you can reduce your electricity load enough that you can then put on a level 2 EV charger. So it gets a little complicated. Now, in terms of product, as I mentioned earlier, the Americans started this in the 80s. They haven't really kept up with the Asians. So these are names you may mention, and I kind of laugh at Lennox showing their heat pump sitting on the grass. Well, that's fine in Florida because they like heat pumps to keep them cool, and it's cheaper than paying for base electricity. However, this is what happens. We've got a Japanese one on the left, it's on a stand, and an American one on the right. There wasn't that much snow, so they didn't have to go and dig around it, but that's what you have to be aware of. So the big names in the Asian line, the product line is Mitsubishi, LG, as you know, appliance manufacturer, Fujitsu, which is what Hart has got, Idea and Daikin. So you see that they are off the ground on different mounting systems. So what other things can you do that aren't too expensive? I won't go through all of this, but typically in order, air sealing, just materials, you can do this mostly yourself, is a couple $100, and you can save up to 10% of your fossil fuels. Louise had a particular drafty hole in her basement from the shower stall that was put in, and there was a hole in the ceiling underneath in the basement that was letting air in. So we plugged that up, and that made a big difference. You can insulate the attic. Next, and there are grants for that. Then insulate the basement walls. Again, grants for that. Then I recommend an electric hot water tank, but not a hybrid. We're going to talk about that later. Because it's a lower cost to get into, and it's still very efficient, the new water tanks. Then the hybrid heat pump is the next in the price range. So you can spend about $8,000 to $14,000, we say on average $10,000, to reduce your fossil fuels by up to close to 90%, and save money as well. Then you get into the expensive stuff: doors, windows, exterior walls, and solar panels. That's another $50,000 to $100,000 and plus, and to get that last little 10%. So I give credit to anybody who goes net zero, but it's not cheap. This is some air sealing we did. Typically under a sink, you'll have a hole in the wall where the drain goes out to, say, an outside wall. You'll notice the hot and cold are inside. They're not on an outside wall. So we plug the hole in the wall. These are foam gaskets. You can put over your receptacles. Sometimes you have a pipe that went out to bring fresh air into the old style mid-efficiency furnaces. You plug that. That's on the upper right, the hole that Louise had, and we foam sealed that and covered it over. And then once we find just holes, it's a hole with the whole material kind of bent upwards. It was just a hole in the basement, that cold area. This is typical refrigerant line going out through the outside wall. You use spray foam. And this was a gas fireplace that had a big hole in it. There's like a little gas-fired stove that needed some sealing. And there are fireproof foam products. So if you've got a hot condition, you can use this fireproof foam. And the attic hatch is often a source of heat loss. Just a little foam gasket can go down that. So if we look just quickly at comparing, again, Burlington, the different amounts of carbon production. We're not talking about cost right now, but for space heating, the average in Burlington, because most people are on natural gas, is about 4 tons. If you go to an air source heat pump, it comes down to a half. And if you use high efficiency natural gas, it's a little better than the average. Water heating, they're all kind of about the same. Appliances obviously are pretty well all electricity, so there's not much difference in fuel type there, because you don't use gas. But on the total is that the air source heat pump produces less carbon than the other alternatives. So what does this take to implement? You do require building permits in Milton and other municipalities, and it's the responsibility of the homeowner, not the installer. But this can cost $1,000 or more. Most people don't do it. I did it myself just to learn what the process was, and it's frustrating. Louise had an experience too. She can mention later that, they're not owner friendly. So I got a proposal to use the data that you get when you do an energy audit, put it in simple form, send it to the city, tell them what you're doing, and don't pay a fee for the permit. So we're going to do the work. Apparently, I found that a lot of installers aren't fully experienced in air source heat pumps, so they're on a learning curve, but if we all work together, I think we can come up with a good solution. Then there are consultants, municipalities, and environmental groups that can do what I call the hand-holding. So what happens after that? Once you seal your house up, I say it's like putting a plastic bag over your head and you can't breathe, so you got to poke a hole in it. You might want to look at heat recovery or energy recovery ventilators. So that will exchange fresh air and take advantage of the hot air that's going out by preheating and cooling and cold air coming in. So now we're on to the panel discussion. Where's Wendy? This mic is acting up a little bit, or is it?
I'm wondering, why don't we try and change?
Change mics?
That's better.
Okay.
So Ed, in the middle, I met him when I was building my house, and I watched him build his house. So he rebuilt a bungalow in Oakville, added second story exterior walls, and built it to close to the passive house standard, which you can talk about later. And he has an energy recovery ventilator, baseboard heaters, and an air source heat pump. Hart has been a friend of Ed's for a while, and got Ed to help him in the design of his new semi-detached construction in Oakville. And he has a full hyper heat pump system where he's got the unit, the outside unit on the roof. Then he's got, similar to what I showed earlier, a main floor unit, and then one up in your second floor that does the bedrooms and the bath.
A ductless.
It's a ductless system.
Right, ductless. Don't access that.
Sorry, it's a combination of ductless. Anyway, there's a solution for everybody. And so Louise, she called me up one day and said, "Jim, I'm going to move and I want to build a green home." And I said, "No, you don't." So she bought lunch for me and Ed, and realized she should buy a house and do what she can to improve it, which I think was the right decision, and she's been happy with the results. So she did, again, the heat pump hybrid with a new gas furnace, added insulation, air sealing, and switched to the electric water tank. And George, I want to give him credit. He's my colleague. We're trying to get more business with these heat pumps, and he's volunteered to be the camera operator tonight. So here we've got a list of questions. Who's going to read? Oh, George is going to read.
Thanks, Jim. So, for the panelists, then perhaps we could start with Louise. We can go Louise, Ed, and Hart on these questions. So this is just to give the audience a flavor for how these people handled their situation. So these are just a few questions that we've prepared for tonight. So to all of you, how did you find out about heat pumps and decide to get one? And did you know the difference between the American and the Asian versions?
I didn't know the difference between the American and the Asian versions, and I didn't even know what a heat pump was when I decided to buy my house in Guelph. But I did know Jim, and I knew that he knew about energy retrofits, and so I relied entirely on him.
As a passive house designer, I specialize in ultra-low energy homes, and so I was well dialed into heat pumps and what they could do. They pair very well with the type of home design that we do, and it's a good system for that. And we were totally, in the world that I move in, we were totally focused on the Asian units, simply because of the fact that we were chasing efficiency. They tend to be more energy efficient. That is, they produce more heat and cooling for the same level of electricity that goes into them. And also operating range is important. So in our climate, we have to have systems that provide heat when it gets really cold and cooling when it's really hot. That's not the hard part, it's the heat when it's really cold. And as Jim has pointed out in his presentation, the Asian systems just happen to offer a much better operating range for our climate.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about heat pumps. Again, I wanted to build an energy efficient house, so from scratch, so I knew I was going to end up with a heat pump, but I first saw it operating in real life at Ed's house, and if I remember correctly, you've got a Mitsubishi, and I relied on Ed's advice that the Fujitsu was the better one for me. So thanks, Ed.
Okay, and next question. How difficult was it to find proper help and guidance?
Absolutely simple because I knew Jim, but I know that for most people it isn't that simple, and what you have to do is admit that you don't know what you're doing and find somebody who does.
It's not really applicable to me. I was already kind of well versed with these systems, so.
Yeah, so for me, again, I was fortunate enough to see what Ed did at his place, but a big challenge for me was to find a builder. So I bought a lot that had a single house on it, 60 feet wide. It was zoned multi-unit, so I subdivided the lot and found a builder to build 2 semis. I mean, like one building, a semi on each side. And we searched actually for a long time, and we ended up with Delridge, who you might be familiar with. They did the West Side Green Life condos, so they're mostly into condo buildings. But lucky for me, they built our units, and just for your information, they are insulated concrete form, so they're concrete walls, 8-inch concrete in the basement, 5 inches of foam on each side, and 6 inches of concrete on the first and second floor with 5 inches of foam on each side.
So when you combine other measures that are possible, reduction measures, insulation, air sealing, did you do that? Look at other measures to combine with the heat pump?
Yes. But I did everything except the windows and doors and solar.
Okay.
My project focused on basically rebuilding and improving the entire building envelope. So I focused a lot on the building shell itself, the insulation, the windows, etc. But the heat pump was always a big part of what was going to be the mechanical system. And so this was all designed together to work as a house as a system, and that's typically the way that we do it in the high efficiency or this ultra low energy homes design. So.
Right, so I think this is a good opportunity to just help people understand. We talk about passive house. Well, what does that mean? And so when my wife and I were deciding about what kind of house are we going to build, we wanted a really energy efficient house, and we found the passive house standard. And again, Ed was using the same standard to guide his design. So the passive house is super insulated. So again, in my case, I've got 10 inches of foam on all the walls. I've got thermally broken, so there's no heat transfer. The basement walls don't touch the basement slab. They don't touch the outside earth. The same for the basement slab. It's in a cocoon of foam. It's got 5 inches of foam underneath. So there's virtually no heat loss like you get in a typical basement. And the other characteristic of the passive house then is super airtight, as Jim was saying. You want to, in an existing home, you want to plug all the any perforations in the building envelope. So when you design a passive house, there's only a few perforations, for the wiring, for the incoming air, outgoing air. But we don't have any bathroom vents. We don't have a dryer vent. So it's really, really super airtight. And then again, the passive house also takes advantage of passive solar heating. So you have bigger windows on the south and west side, smaller windows on the north and east sides, so that just as a natural, part of the natural solar input, you get heating and less cooling with that kind of design. So I'll leave it at that.
Sir, I just have a question. How did the wall doesn't touch the slab? How did it carry the weight of the house?
So it is, sorry, they do sit on footings, so they're sitting on footings, so those are carrying the weight. The basement slab itself is not carrying any of the structural weight.
Great. And with that question from the audience, I'll just encourage anyone else, if anyone sees something during these prepared questions, if you have something you'd like to ask, just raise your hand, and I'll come over and we can ask the question on the mic. So, next one about rebates. Did any of you apply for rebates, and were any of you successful?
I did, and I got $2,500.
At the time we did ours, it was in 2010, and we applied for rebates and we got the maximum available, I think it was close to $4,500, but not for the mechanical systems, unfortunately. It was just for the things like windows and doors and insulation.
Yeah, I guess, again, Ed's was a renovation, so you were eligible for some of those rebates. In 2012, 2013, I wasn't aware of any rebates, so I didn't get any rebates. But I would note that the actual construction from pouring the footings to moving in took only 5 months.
Thanks. We have a question pertaining to that from the audience.
Yeah, thanks very much. I live in Well, actually, I'm a neighbor of Louise's, and my friend Steve next door to me. We all live in a seniors community in Well. Most of our homes are 20 to 25 years old, so we're all looking at retrofits as opposed to new homes. But on the question of rebates, a week or so ago, I had a company come and give me a quote on installing a heat pump, and this is a company that supplies, furnaces, air conditioning, heat pumps, so forth. And they told me that I could get, in fact, they would guarantee I would get a $5,000 rebate if I installed their heat pump and a high-efficiency furnace. And I said, well, my furnace is only about 11 years old. Can I use the heat pump with that furnace? They said, yes, but you wouldn't get any rebate at all. And I kind of wondered about that. I thought it would be possible to get some rebate for just installing the heat pump. So can one of you answer that?
Jim should answer that one.
Yeah, that's still evolving. They're starting to realize the benefits of hybrid heat pumps. So it's coming now. They said if you have just a heat pump, it has to heat all the levels that are occupied in your house. If you got a bungalow, just one, if you got 2 stories. So it's coming, and then there's like maybe $2,000 for partial. Sorry.
That's okay.
So yeah, don't give up.
Another question from the audience?
I had a situation happen about a year ago. My furnace went kaput, and I could either get it fixed or I could get a new system. And at the time, I'd been reading up about heat pumps. So I ended up getting the hybrid system, a carrier system. However, because I did that and I didn't apply for the rebate, or I tried to after the fact, I wasn't able to get a rebate. I was kind of put off by it because it was an expensive purchase. And I don't know if there's any recourse, but I think there isn't. But
No, I feel sorry, for government, not to get political, but there were programs like electric cars, and there was there is still an income-based rebate program. So it depends on the family income, how much you get. So that's still in existence. But again, so anyone who built new didn't get a cent. I didn't get a cent. And Ed and Hart didn't either.
Well, I think what I should have done, I should have got an energy audit, but I didn't know this was going to happen. But I just think that if anybody is thinking about, or they know they're going to have to possibly replace their furnace, and they do want to go to heat, that they get somebody in before the fact.
That's why we're doing this. We're trying to get the word out, so keep spreading the word.
Yeah.
That's all I can think. Some other back here.
And we had another question here? It's okay, for now.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question to the, what you said about the heat pump should heat all the levels of your home. Does it not? Like the heat source heat pump, does it not heat all levels on your home?
Well, as I say, there's if you go with the mini splits, you can just say you've got a cold basement where you watch TV, you can just put one in there. Or you got a hot room for grandma living upstairs, you can just cool that. So yeah, you don't need to heat all the house evenly. If you've got a central system, that's obviously a lot simpler, but all homes don't have central systems.
So if I do have like the furnace with the ducts and I want to do a hybrid, that would heat all my levels?
Yes.
Okay.
There's different types of systems that range from ones that interface with an existing system like yours that do the whole house to individual units that then turn the house into like multiple zones. So it really depends on the situation and the needs of the house are. In some homes, there's maybe only comfort issues with one particular room. Sometimes a great room, which is you've got a beautiful view or whatever, but for whatever reason, there's too much heat loss through the windows or the walls or overheating. And so a lot of times, a heat pump in that particular room, maybe a ductless system, whose job is just to condition the space in that area is a good solution. But the heating that it provides, or the cooling, wouldn't necessarily provide relief to the rest of the house. So, but there is a range of systems depending on what the needs are and the budget and the existing systems you already have.
But if I wanted the heat pump to be my main source, that would qualify for the rebate because it would be heating all the levels of my home, right?
Sorry, if you put it just on the main floor of your house?
No, sorry, with the furnace, a hybrid heat pump on an existing
Yeah,
house.
that was to be my main source of heat, the heat pump.
Right.
That would qualify for a rebate, correct?
The products that I've been installing don't. They were 1/10 of a point shy of meeting the government's criteria, which I won't get into my arguments with them, but because these are Chinese products and they're low cost, so they're like $6,000 without a rebate compared to $15,000 with a rebate, which is still $11,000. So you're better still to go with the better performing one. So yeah, don't think you always have to get a rebate. That's what we do. Analyze all your options for you so that you can make a informed decision.
So one other question?
Hi. I have an old house, it's 1920, and I have heating with a gas furnace, but I don't have cooling. And I applied to the Greener Homes grant program and had an HVAC contractor come to explain what I could do to qualify for the grant. To that gentleman's point, the option of adding a heat pump to the existing furnace but not doing anything, not changing the furnace, he said didn't qualify. Because I guess it doesn't improve the efficiency of what the furnace is doing, and the point of the grant is to improve your efficiency. So just adding a heat pump, he said, didn't qualify.
You were misinformed.
Oh.
We should have a separate conversation. Well, yeah, you've been misinformed, and there's a lot of, I don't criticize these people, they just haven't taken the training, they're just not up to speed with, like a heat pump, because it's getting 200-300% efficiency, it is more efficient than a 95% gas furnace. So, you know, that is right, but the ones at the time, probably a couple of years ago, you know, it was just until recently there weren't rebates. So he was right, but it wasn't because of lack of efficiency.
Okay, that's good, I'll pursue that. But my question actually was going to be, so the furnace that I have, it's 18 years old or something. My basement, because it's an old house, is no more than 6 feet, it's 5'11" to the other side of the joist. And the box that is the furnace, I don't know all what it does, but like there's a bottom piece which is about 3 feet tall, and then there's stuff on top of it. And there was something he said that I didn't understand about, that there wasn't enough height in the basement to add a heat pump to the top of the furnace. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yeah, but Mitzair has a 5-foot unit that will fit pretty well in any basement. So you don't put the coil on top, you actually have to forego your old box that the furnace is in and get a new box with the floor fan, the coil, and the electrical controls.
But is it still called a furnace? Called something else?
Yeah, well, it's a heater. Call it a heater.
Okay. And it still has that white box with the fan on the outside of the house?
No, you don't need that.
You don't?
Well, we're getting a little complicated.
Sorry, okay. Thanks for the info.
I can give you my card after.
Okay, moving along then. We had a question, a prepared question about condo boards, and I don't know if any of you had direct experience or perhaps anecdotal stories about condo. Perhaps Bert does, and maybe Jim, you have something to add?
Yeah, I have a friend who installed a heat pump. He lived in a condo in Bronte, right at the harbor, so an older condo building, and there was no particular issues. There were no particular issues with installing the heat pump. I mean, it's just, you know, it went up maybe a floor and a half higher than his unit, or maybe 2 floors, and they just ran the refrigerant lines down to his unit, and didn't have any issues.
Jim, do you have anything to add to that at all, or Bart?
Yeah, I've got 2 horror stories. A woman still is trying to get her property manager to know what a heat pump is. So, because they don't understand the heat pump, they're not getting back to her. Typically, you can understand in the condo, high-rise, or townhouses, they don't want to have ugly boxes hanging all over the buildings. So typically what they say is, like what Nicole did, you're allowed to put it in the back, either on the wall or on the ground, but not on the front. And even with Louise's situation, she had to get approval from her board, but she was just swapping out something that looked like an air conditioner as far as you could tell from the street. So what I advised was tell her what you're going to do. I'll give you a letter saying what you're going to do. Don't ask for permission. You know, that term is, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission. So sometimes that works.
I didn't actually have to ask for forgiveness. I just told them what we were planning to do, and there was no problem. And it was a good opportunity to add that my old air conditioner sounded like a helicopter taking off. And I was really glad to get rid of it. And the new heat pump, you can barely tell when it's running, you can barely hear it. So my neighbors appreciate the fact that they're not listening to that often. They're only noise.
Jim, I'd like to see you sat down and enjoy the panel. That's good. Do we have another question from the audience? Maybe you can come over. It might be easier.
We've been discussing the heating of the air, and I've heard of geothermal heating. I've heard of the geothermal heating of the, we found out about heating by the air system. How does that differentiate in cost factor? And just asking, after installation, what is this maintenance required, please?
take the first crack at this. So the builder that built the two semis, right, the building that went on the lot that I bought, they put geothermal for their unit, and I used an air source heat pump for my unit. They paid about $25,000 just to drill the pipes, and then they had to add the equipment on to that. So, and I think I paid, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000. Tell me, what did we pay for the equipment for the Fujitsu? Do you remember?
It's probably not installed. I don't remember if it's probably just no exact just for those systems.
Yeah, it was definitely under 10,000, so a big cost difference. And it's interesting that last year, my neighbor, he actually installed a small heat pump unit in addition to cool his bedroom, where again, you've got big windows on the southwest side, so it was overheating, and the geothermal system, even though it's very expensive, just wasn't, I don't know the details, and I'm not a mechanical engineer, but it wasn't comfortable for the owner. So geothermal isn't always the better answer.
And the other one I wanted to ask, like the air pumps, the heating, the maintenance, how does that go? Are they very prone to a lot of maintenance?
When I had my system put in, I said to the HVAC installer, so are you going to come out every year and check this out? He says, why? I said, well, I did that with my furnace and air conditioner. He said, do you do it with your refrigerator? I said, no. So after 5 years, I got mine checked out. He said, well, we should clean the leaves off this coil here. So for $100, he did that and went home.
In my case, I have to have an annual checkup or else my warranty is not good. So I pay $20 a month to Langton something or other, who come out and look at my equipment annually, and we always joke about it because there's never anything wrong with it. And he always, at the end of the thing, he says, so, no surprises, nothing wrong.
So I've had my mechanical systems now for 9 years, actually 9.5, and no maintenance required. They're basically self-diagnosing. I did have one issue, and maybe this is just a warning for anybody who is thinking of installing a heat pump or will install a heat pump. I'm in South Oakville, and Oakville Hydro, they use brute force methods to load balance their electrical grid. My heat pump actually malfunctioned, and it's like, you know, what's going on? After a lot of diagnosis, one of the circuit boards had burned out. Oakville Hydro was pumping 253 volts of electricity into my house, where it's, of course, supposed to be between 220 and 240. So it was just, the voltage was too high, and they have more frequent power outages than they should have. So, you know, when the power comes back on, you get a surge, and it just, that one of those surges fried the board. They actually came out and stepped down my voltage to the proper level. They went down to climb the pole and step down my voltage on the transformer. So my recommendation is either check your voltage or put in a voltage stabilizer so that you don't have to go through the hassle of getting those repairs done. But other than that, for my ventilation system, my heat pump system, most comfortable house I've ever lived in, no maintenance whatsoever.
Well, except for filters. There are filters. You have to change filters just like furnace filters. There's a similar type of filter which needs to be changed. The more often you do it, the better. Not like a Volkswagen Beetle where you change the oil every 200,000 kilometers. You have to change the filters as often as you can.
Totally,
6 months, every 6 months.
totally clean house. So, discussing windows, just going a step further. What was the best option? Vinyl, UPVC, or fiberglass windows?
It depends. There's a lot of window suppliers out there, so it's a completely different topic.
But
But it really depends.
Efficiency, like vinyl windows or fiberglass windows or UPVC.
And there's also double pane and triple pane windows, and it depends. It depends. Part of what an energy auditor does, or what I do as part of my business, is energy modeling that helps make objective decisions. We can model what the house, how the house is built, and see where the critical areas of heat loss are, and then you can focus your money on the biggest culprits, so to speak. But to answer your question, there's lots of great windows out there. A lot of it is aesthetic. Fiberglass windows are popular in the energy efficiency field because fiberglass as a material has good heat, has good properties, has good thermal properties. It slows the heat loss versus aluminum and PVC frames. But a lot of the modern systems now are all pretty compatible. It just comes down to looks and budget and whatnot. So sorry, that was off topic.
So my windows are fiberglass. I think yours are too, right, Ed? Again, 9 years, they're in great shape, like triple pane fiberglass. It's also the quietest house I've ever lived in. Triple pane windows with concrete walls. You hear nothing.
Okay, another one of our questions that we have. Did you have another question, follow-up, or? Yeah, sure.
Are there restrictions with heat pumps with regard to wood fireplaces?
Well, wood fireplaces,
If your house has it.
they can be tricky. The trouble with wood fireplaces, it's a really bad leak in your house, and it's a necessary one because you obviously need to exhaust the combustants from your fire, right? So, we don't do projects. We don't use those types of systems at all. And I'm trying to think if I've done a project in the last 10 years where we tried to save one or whatever. I don't think so. I'm not sure how that would affect the heat pump. It's just a big air leak in your house if you don't have a good damper on it, which most of them are not. Who doesn't love a fire? Like, it's not something that I want to criticize because who doesn't love to have a natural fire, in a fireplace? But if it's not something that you use very often, or you might consider decommissioning it somehow. That would be my advice if you're seeking to have an energy efficient house where all your systems work as best as they can, including the heat pumps. Probably not the answer you want to hear.
You won't need an HRV with a big hole in your house.
You won't need one, no, exactly. You won't get any heat recovery either.
I have two questions actually. So the first question, back to that slide, because I actually was talking to my own heating guy, and the other day I had a house in Hamilton who sold me a AC for a little over $3,000, and I was asking about heat pump like diligently, and he's like, oh well, it's 7,000 plus. But you're saying like acquisition price or installation price is cheaper for the hybrid system versus gas furnace plus AC? How did you get into that calculation? That's my first question. My second question is, I have what do you call it? In my house, there's a furnace and there's ducts that goes all in every level, and we have the typical cold basement, the typical hot top floor. Is there any easy solution for that? Should I not do ducts anymore?
Well, what we offer for homeowners is to do a survey of your existing conditions, so we have to analyze a lot of data. So I can't just give you a simple answer now. But we do this for free as well, and we get you the best installers and product we can find. You can't just compare an air conditioner to a heat pump because the heat pump does heating as well. So why don't you see me after, and I'd be happy to help you.
Maybe answer. I'd like to comment on the second question you had about why the house is cold. The basement's always cold, and the upstairs levels are always hot. So most heating systems in Ontario, most houses have a central system, like a gas furnace or some kind of furnace, electric furnace, whatever, and then the ducts distribute that heat throughout the house. Typically it's in the basement, and there's almost always an air conditioner as well. So what happens is, in the wintertime, your house is asking for heat. So the furnace from the central point is making heat and trying to send it everywhere in the house, trying to keep the house happy everywhere off one single thermostat, because it's basically one zone. And it's very difficult to do because the farther it has to go, it's going to lose heat. Maybe the system has maybe there's a lunch bag in there so that when the house is built, these things happen, believe it or not. And you're not getting enough heat. In the summertime, the opposite happens. Then you have very cold, dense air in the furnace, which your furnace is trying to push to the farthest point in the room, and it's kind of like an invisible waterfall. It's pumping it up, but it all going back to the basement. That's why, it's 35 degrees outside, but you got to put your snowmobile suit to go downstairs and watch TV or whatever. So this is the challenge of central systems. Newer HVAC systems have multiple zoning ability. So off the furnace, they'll have multiple trunks, one on the second floor, one on the main floor, one on the first floor, different dampers. It's gotten pretty sophisticated, but with that comes a lot of added cost. That makes it very expensive on a ducted system. But this is where heat pumps have a huge advantage as well, is that you can have a heat pump on every floor or in every zone that you require, and then you can control the heating and cooling demands per zone of that. And depending on the system, it could be less duct intensive as well, like have fewer ducts. Harder to do on a retrofit, but certainly for new construction that would be the case. But maybe even on a retrofit, there'd be solutions that might work well. The idea is to have different zones because your house loses heat at different rates, and if you have windows and you get a lot of heat in the summertime or whatever, that part of the house is going to get really hot, maybe even in the wintertime. Other parts are not going to be. So trying to ask your house to provide maximum comfort off a single thermostat is really difficult to do.
As far as cold basements, you got to insulate. Like, you'll never get rid of a cold basement unless you insulate. And with the existing house, it's a challenge.
Another audience question here?
Yeah, since we're sort of asking questions about anything, in one of your early slides, Jim, you mentioned installation of the Zuba, which is from Mitsubishi, the heat pump that doesn't require a furnace, and you said it was $15,000 to $17,000. The company that I had quoting me a week or so ago quoted $26,000 after a $5,000 rebate. So in other words, pretty much double what you quoted. So and they also said that there would be trouble fitting the inside unit. There's an outside unit and an inside unit, and that inside unit, they have trouble fitting that in my basement, similar to what the lady over here was saying, that there wasn't enough height in the basement. They could do a horizontal installation, but it was much more expensive. So any comment on that would be helpful.
I'm just working out the final details of what thermostat he wants, whether he wants Wi-Fi. For $16,000, this is a 2,500 two-story house with two-car garage and Ancaster. And he had the gas furnace and air conditioner. So again, and he had enough ceiling height. It's a 3-ton unit, so I'm not sure what size you need to use for your house. A 3-ton is what my house is, and I had 3,800 square feet of heated area.
Yeah, mine's only about 1,500, so.
Yeah, so you could probably get away with a 2 or 2.5 ton for like $12,000 installed. So, there is, a lot of people are making money in the HVAC industry because they can. I don't believe in that philosophy.
So another one of our prepared questions then, what about borrowing for your heat pump? Does anyone have experience with that, please?
No.
I have a mortgage on my house.
Jim, any experience in that category? For yourself, Jim? Or any stories?
Just, when I built the house, I built new, so it was all factored into the construction costs. Of course, as my wife said, you're going to go 25% over. No, I'm an engineer. I'm going to keep things right to the penny. Well, we went 20% over. But that wasn't just the heat pump.
Okay. In the same category, what about government-based loans? Anyone with any experience on that?
Sorry, I'm gonna answer a different question, give it back to Jim, but I want to take this opportunity. I just heard that the Ontario government, believe it or not, has announced a new program for subsidies for heat pumps.
Breaking news.
But this was on yesterday, came out yesterday, but it's only for 1,000 homes, and only it's like in St. Catharines, London, Peterborough, Sault Ste. Marie, I think. Like anyway, so unless you live there, it doesn't apply to you. But we can dream and hope that it's a pilot program that might expand. Let's hope. And it's down with Enbridge, if I'm not mistaken.
So I signed up with a company called Finance It. They'll lend you up to $2 million at 10% over 15 years, which makes your monthly costs break even. None of my customers wanted financing. Nobody. They all wanted rebates.
So another one of our prepared questions. So what are your experiences with installers so far, Louise?
I didn't have to find them because Jim did.
Yeah, I was a contractor at the time, I had no problems either.
So the installers for the heat pump were from Hamilton. Was it Green Energy or what's?
They were subsidy. They were subsidy.
Green
Regular subsidy.
Right. But I'm just just so that people know, there's a contractor in Hamilton called the Green Method, and they were. Oh, they don't do residential anymore. Okay.
They're involved.
Sorry, I was trying. Sorry about that.
I understand that there is a shortage of installers though, and that the knowledge level of installers is not always what it should be. So I think it's something to be cautious about.
Well, you guys in Milton, you're halfway between Toronto and Hamilton, and I found that the Hamilton trades are friendlier and less expensive.
I haven't had anything installed, but I can comment on what I've heard from two different HVAC firms that have quoted to me. That Jim, you're an consultant, and you find the different installers for the different components and so forth. They want to do it all for you, and so one of the reasons they quoted me $26,000 rather than 15 or 17 for that Zuba system is because they're doing the overall general contracting work. They also want you to use their energy audit system, and I have no idea whether their energy auditors are of any quality or not. So I guess if you're thinking of a retrofit and getting an HVAC company to come and do it, you probably want to, it's a case of buyer beware, I think, and trying to find out as much as you can about what they're offering and what's included and why they're costing so much.
And Jim, during your presentation, you mentioned electrical inspections. Any of our panelists have any experience with electrical inspections?
I didn't have to have one.
Okay.
No, it was all part of my regular building permit process. Yeah.
There's a caveat there that HVAC installers can take a 2-day course and be licensed to do wiring for the type of equipment they install. They can't rewire your basement, but they can hook up an air conditioner or a heat pump or a furnace.
Okay, so what about operating your systems at home? Any difficulties
This one
with
makes
that?
me laugh because I was offered, Jim said, you know, if you want one of those smart remotes so that you can control the heat in your home or the cooling in your home no matter where you are. I said, absolutely not. I want something that has an arrow that goes up for warmer and down for colder. Don't give me anything else, that's all I want. That's what I got, and that's what it does, and it's perfect. Although I should say, it does tell me when the filter needs to be changed. A thing comes on that says filter, 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 and bugs me until I go change the filter. But that's the only thing on why there isn't. So operating the system, that's it. That's all there is to it.
That's a pretty simple control. It's the one going around the room. It's that long white one that you saw. That's the control for the heat pump, typical control.
Just one more comment. So in my house, I've got the heat pump system, but I also have, because it's, again, as Jim was saying, it's super insulated, so yeah, I've got that plastic bag syndrome. So if I didn't do anything else, the air would get stale. So I have an energy recovery ventilation system. So I've got two systems. I've got the heat pump, which does heating and cooling, and I've got the ventilation systems. So basically, the ventilation system, it's just, you can have the ventilation, at low, medium, or high. So it's just a dial. I typically keep it on low. Sometimes in the summer, I have a ground loop, which kind of gives me a bit of free air conditioning. And if you want information about that, I can tell you afterwards. But I sometimes turn up the ventilation a little higher to get that extra cooling without using power. The other advantage of the system that I had installed, it's a mini split, so it has one outside unit and two inside units, so you can control the heating and cooling on different levels, so I've got a remote for the main floor and a remote for the top floor. So I've got basically two zones that operate off of one heat pump.
Hart, just before you go, do you have a cost on that device for the audience?
Sorry, the cost.
The ventilation.
Oh, and the ventilation.
Rough?
I'm gonna defer to Ed because,
It depends. I don't mean to be vague, but it depends. Sometimes it's a standalone system. The one that Hart has, or that I have, is a standalone system with its own ducting. So that's a little bit more expensive to install. But a typical installation is basically a system where it piggybacks on your existing ductwork. So it brings in fresh air from outside and distributes it through your duct system.
I've got prices.
What's that?
I've got prices.
Okay, and Jim has prices on it. So there we go.
They're different makes and models, but they're around $3,500 to $4,100 installed. And a lot of them will have a control in every bathroom. And some of them use wireless, some of them fish wires through the wall. So that can affect the installed price. But they're under $4,000.
So I'll just add that I thought of this when you were speaking. I do have a humidity issue in my house. I had that before I got the heat pump, and I still have it. So in the summertime, when it gets too humid in my house, I run an old-fashioned dehumidifier downstairs. So I guess you could call that operation of my heating and cooling system too. So there is that. And I don't have a heat recovery ventilator, and I don't really think I need one. Do I? I don't think I need one.
That's the analysis we do. We went through this with movies, and there's different ways you can have just a box that hangs from the ceiling in the basement tied into your ductwork, or you can get, you just drill a 6-inch hole through the wall in that end of the house, and in that end of the house, and you put one in that blows air out while this one's sucking in. So there are different, and those are around $2,000 installed. So there are different options depending on what your situation is.
Okay, and how about smart thermostats? Do we have experience with that?
I'm against them.
I don't have any, but I know they're out there, and people who love gadgets are good with gadgets. I think there's systems that can be found that will make them happy.
I don't have one, but I would just add that when you have a well-insulated house, the temperature it doesn't tend to, like, you don't need as much heating and cooling as you do with a more drafty house. So I would say the efficiency benefits of a smart thermostat might be a bit less in an energy efficient house than in a drafty house.
We're getting ready for the next question.
Well, I have a question about smart thermostats, Jim. You mentioned that control unit on the wall, that like we showed pictures in Louise's system, and that's what controls whether you're getting heating from the heat pump or the furnace and so forth. Well, at least one of the suppliers, in fact both of them I guess, for their hybrid system, they want to sell you an ecobee thermostat, and they say that the ecobee actually takes the place of the control unit. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, it is, but with hybrid heat pumps, ecobee don't know how to program them. So the technician from Midsair, my energy advisor friend, and I pulled our hair out until we figured out how to make it work. So we can tell you if you want to get an ecobee, and you got the $500 or $600, you can get lots of good data if you're into numbers. So yeah, there's nothing. The one I've heard that people have problems with is called Nest. I think it's Google or something.
I have it.
Yeah, well, they say if you drop it on the floor, you got to get a new one. Whereas this one, I can drop it and catch it on the bounce, and we still keep working.
I never dropped it yet.
Isn't that why you fasten it to the wall?
Yeah.
So related to maintenance, I think we've addressed that subject. How about energy costs? Are you tracking your energy costs and the differences before and after?
Hang on. Back to this, because this question just came up. Whoops. Oh. Do you set it back at night? For the guy who got the Zuba, he says, I usually turn it back to 16 at night. And I said, well, that's nice, you're going to save some energy, but it's going to cost you a lot. And you probably won't get your house warm until 10 in the morning. If you're retired and sleep in, that may not be an issue. But for working people, I don't recommend turning it back at night just because of comfort, and it is cheaper with our time of use electricity.
So we're at energy costs, right? So my average monthly electricity cost went up to $89.83 a month, and it used to be about $57 a month. So that was an increase, and an expected increase, and that's because, of course, I'm running the electricity a lot. My gas costs, here I got really confused because I buy gas from Enbridge, and Enbridge kept overcharging me based on what they thought I might use, and then rebating, and then changing the monthly amount, and then rebating, and then change. The nearest so I finally phoned them and said, tell me how much I paid for gas in 2020. So they said, okay, you paid $609.61. And
how much did you use?
Well, I can tell you how much I used, but that's another story. Anyway, so that was about $50 a month. In 2021, they told me I used $824.35, so that my gas costs actually went up in 2021, and that was after the heat pump was installed, so that made no sense at all. And why is that? It's because they were charging me based on what they thought I would use, instead of charging me based on what I did use. This year, in 2022, from January until today, I've paid $203.14. So they finally adjusted it down. So, and that's about $22.57 a month. So I'll take that for what it's worth. I don't know, when the dust settles, I'll have a better number for you for the end of 2022. But I'm paying somewhere between $30 and $50 less for gas, and somewhere at about $30 more for hydro.
Yeah, so I lived in a townhouse about the same size before I moved into the new place. And my total utility bill, gas and electric, was in a year, was about $2,000. And now I'm electric only. I don't have a gas line. I don't pay the distribution fee, blah, blah, like zero for gas. And my electricity bill, per year, it fluctuates between $1,400 and $1,600, so about somewhere around $130 to $140 a month. So that's my total utilities. So, again, for a 2,200 square foot place. And that actually includes my electric car, but that's another story.
Go ahead. I just wanted to mention, I've had a hybrid system for a year and a half. And so far this year, I've used 540 cubic meters of natural gas. I can't tell you what I used because of the time when I had it installed, I can't make any comparisons. But I also had problems with Enbridge doing the same thing. So I now do my own readings every month. They prompt me and I do it. And I just did one. I didn't use anything for, I guess, the month of August, September, whatever. So you got to watch those guys. And also I found out, it was, I don't know, a year or more ago, they were charging about 12 cents per cubic meter. And now they've gone up to about 32 cents per cubic meter. So it's almost tripled, and you're going to notice your natural gas bills go way up. And they're apparently, in October, they're going to put through another increase. So they're losing money, but they're trying to get it back. So I've watched them.
Okay. Thanks for that. We have a slide up now that is showing before and after of carbon footprint. Do we want to spend a little time on this?
Yeah, so this is just looking at the, I don't want to bore people with terminology, but I call it carbon, but it's actually equivalent tons of carbon dioxide. So I just said tons of CO2, and the metric is with a double NES as opposed to when you get an air conditioner, it's 2 tons TONS, and that's the old imperial system of how much it took to melt a ton of ice. Anyway, so what I got here is it's when I built my house, I had an on-demand gas water heater, gas fireplace, gas stove top, like convection oven. And then last year I switched to the 2 separate electric tanks, one under the kitchen that gives me water in 10 seconds because it was taking 2 minutes with on-demand. On-demand may save you money, but it takes time to get heat to your sinks. Anyway, so I went from a total of 1.66 tons a year down to 0.98. So Ed and I were talking about he couldn't dig out all this stuff, but he was very typical, and you look at Hart at the same time, they're all around, the 4.5 to 5 tons of gas, and then a certain amount of electricity. So the total is about 5 tons each. And now they're down to, a quarter and a half. Louise hasn't done a complete building envelope redo, but she's actually doing better than me.
That's a good summary, Jim. Anything else to add? Okay. All right, so I think we've substantiated that there's not much maintenance. What about repairs? Anything come up? So far? To mention?
It's a mechanical system, anything can happen, right? So I've had some issues with my system, but they're resolved, but it just goes to show that even the best systems there's complexity in all these systems, and sometimes they need to be repaired. As an example, we bought all new appliances, nothing to do with the heat pump. We bought all new appliances in 2010. Like every single appliance has been repaired. repaired since then. And we replaced the fridge after 10 years, and we replaced the dishwasher. And like all I did with the dishwasher was wash dishes. Like I never took it camping and never played road hockey with it. You know what I'm saying? Like I asked them to be a dishwasher. And in fact, we super rinsed our dishes before we put them in. So this was like a dream gig for a dishwasher to be in our house. But I crapped out after. So all to say, systems have complexity and that catches up to us sometimes.
Ed helped me replace a fuse in my ERV. And besides the voltage problem that I mentioned before, no repairs.
And how about extended family and friends? Any stories about extended family and friends?
Sure. I have friends in the village where I live who have heat pumps, and one of them sitting right there, Stephen. And we've had, I think, I have two other friends in the village who installed heat pumps subsequent to mine, and another one who is beside me who's thinking of putting in a heat pump because his furnace is going to die probably this year or next year. So it's slow uptake. I wish it were happening faster, but I think people are doing the sensible thing. They're waiting until their furnace is just about, doesn't owe them anything, right? And then they're making the change. And that's what I did, so I can't expect anything more than that.
I just get asked about it a lot. My friends, anybody who's thinking of upgrading your furnace or the furnace on the last thing I usually get a phone call asking what my opinion is on it now. Yeah, there's a lot of interest in doing these types of things.
I've referred a couple of people to Jim. I think one of them's going to do something. I'm not sure, but yeah, there's reluctance and engineering challenges, I guess.
That's interesting. We mentioned earlier about uneven heat in houses. So Bill called me and said, you know, it's hot up in my daughter's bedroom. Can you do something? So I went in with my laser thermometer. First of all, the AC was going full out. Beside the air conditioner, the inside part of the coil in the basement, it was 12 degrees centigrade. 12. In Kelly's bedroom, it was 25, and in the ensuite bathroom, it was 29. I like to sell heat pumps. I said, Bill, we can throw a heat pump in every room of your house, or you got the money. He said, well, is there anything else? I said, yeah, you don't have any roof vents. You need good roof ventilation. Now, I talked to Ed about this, and you do need good roof ventilation, but not to cool your bedrooms. It's more to prevent your roof from rotting. So, this is not a simple answer, but I said, hold off on getting a heat pump until we see what we can do with ventilation and then return air. A lot of houses don't have enough return air. I've got one in every room of my house as well as a supply air. And that's why my temperature is within 1 degree from one floor to the next, and harder are the same. So there are solutions, but you know, I don't force people to jump at a heat pump off the bat.
Excellent. And so what about, I'll give you an audience question.
When you were asking about people, do you have friends or relatives? I come from New Brunswick, and everybody in New Brunswick has heat pumps. And my parents got one in probably 2003. They converted their oil furnace to heat pump. And my mom is now 95 in an apartment, and she has a mini split and baseboards. And it's very common. In Montreal, I have a family in Montreal, they all have heat pumps. And I always asked about it here, and they were like, oh no, we don't use that here in Ontario. But I'm in the market now, and I really was enjoying this.
Are you Bev?
Yes.
Nice to meet you. So I've got relatives in Nova Scotia and on the island as well. The answer is they don't have natural gas, but propane and fuel oil and straight baseboard electricity is 3 times the price, even if you have your type of heat pump, which is kind of the American, cuts off. But my brother-in-law has had a heat pump for, I don't know, 20, 30 years.
Big houses.
but they're not as efficient as the new ones. So that's why in Ontario, we're just getting to the point where a heat pump can outperform natural gas. And with costs continuing to rise, it's just going to get better.
So as we're talking about an electrical system now, what about power outages?
So I think I'm probably going to depend on my neighbors if the power goes out, because I don't have a plan.
That's a good plan, please.
Well, again, I think, in my home's particular case, I think it has a lot of survivability. It's super insulated. It gets good past the solar gate. If it's sunny, the house would probably survive for a really long time without freezing. I don't know what, I'd never put it to the test. I hope I never have to. But it's a tough question to answer. I don't know what you would do. I would invite everybody over in the street to my house so I could just have their body heat as the furnace. And, there we go.
The equivalent of a hair dryer, right, Ed?
What's that?
The equivalent of a hair dryer.
Exactly.
5 people, perhaps?
Exactly. 1,500 watts worth of people.
I know I did read an article about a passive house in Minnesota, and they were out in the country, there was a power failure for like, I think a week or something, and it went down to 10 degrees Celsius in the house, but didn't go below that. So 10 degrees is not comfortable, but it's a good measure above freezing. So I think the same thing would happen in our houses if we had a, so it's that super insulation and passive heating that keeps your pipes from bursting.
My insulation's pretty good too, and I have candles.
We're looking at worst case scenarios here, but what about if the heat pump does break down?
Since I got the mic, so I feel we have to transition off gas. It's not cold turkey overnight. That's why I consider the $300 annual fee by Enbridge to be insurance. So if my heat pump does break down, and like Hart, I got hit by a power surge and it took out 4 circuit boards in the outdoor unit. Luckily, the dealer replaced it for free, but that can happen. Anyway, in the meantime, I had my gas fireplace. And as you know, those will run without electricity. Some of them you have to, use a mark, turn the starter on, but whatever. So that's my backup if my heat pump is out for a while.
I think that's a pretty good answer. How about the next one? So coming down to one of the last couple of questions then, what about your overall experience? And if you had a chance to do it again, would you do it any differently, your installation? Any comments there?
So I thought the experience was fantastic. I was so excited to see my results and how much I reduced my carbon footprint. I just thought it was wonderful. And it was easy for me because I didn't have to be the expert because I knew the experts. So if there was one thing I would do differently, I wouldn't do as many audits. Because at the beginning of the process for me, so I'd had an energy audit done to just establish a baseline, and then I had another one done just because it was available and it was free, and I could compare it to the first one. I had the third one done because in order to get the rebate, I had to do the sequence of actions within a certain time frame after the audit. So I had to end up doing a third audit, which was sort of silly in the circumstances. But it got me the $2,500 rebate, so it was worth it.
I've learned a lot since I installed the heat pump in my house in 2010. And I would do it again for sure. One of the main things that I learned is that a system has 2 things. It has capacity, that is how much heat and cooling it produces, and you also need distribution, how effectively it gets it into where it needs to go. We installed a system that has enough capacity to heat and cool our whole house, but we got a ductless system, so a single distribution point that we installed on our 2nd floor. And it does actually a really good job in cooling mode because, again, the heavier cold air tends to mix in the house very nicely. But in heating mode, it mostly is buoyant and stays on the 2nd floor, and it gets too hot in like 10 minutes. So consequently, most of the heating in our house is done with electric baseboard heating, which is kind of a shame because that wasn't the original intent. And I did arrange my affairs so that I've got extra. I roughed pathways in to get another system in my house, but I've opted not to do that because it doesn't cost me very much to run it right now. But one of the main lessons is that, having multiple zones in your house makes a big difference in terms of comfort. And it's certainly something that is done pretty routinely now. I wasn't the only one who sort of did the one distribution point, hoping it would heat and cool the whole house. A lot of us, doing the types of houses we were doing, these passive houses, had kind of the same idea, but we all know it doesn't work very well now. So that was a good lesson learned.
Yeah, and we learned, you applied that learning to my design. And like I say, the most comfortable house I've ever lived in. I wouldn't do anything differently.
Well, we've gone beyond our time that we had planned for, but I think we went beyond it because we had a great time doing it. The audience participated, it was great, a lot of great questions, a lot of great answers too. So at this point, I'd like to hand it back to Wendy, I think. Or, sorry?
Can I just make one last comment? Sure. Just one last comment, please. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming out. I'll let Jim say that too. One of the things that I think is really hard to get a handle on when you're trying to analyze these things is trying to wrap your head around different units of measure, right? We've got gas bills in cubic meters, trying to compare to electricity bills and kilowatt hours. Most people don't probably digest the kilowatt usage, they just look at the total. If someone asks you, what's your hydro bill like? You're going to say, it's $300 a month. Do you know how many kilowatt hours you use? Do you know how many, if you happen to have time of use, if your utility offers that, do you know how many were peak hours, how many were mid, etc.? So being energy literate, being literate with these things really is important if you want to make any informed decisions going forward. Read up and find out, well, how many kilowatt hours in a cubic meter of gas if you're trying to make the conversion? It's about roughly 10. But just to say that we all have trouble with this. It's kind of like a moving target, all these different units, and we're just trying to make decisions on things like heat pumps and whatnot based on solid factual analysis, and it just can be tricky to do. So I think investing time and getting to know a little bit about what your current utility bills are telling you is probably a really good idea.
Thanks, Ed. Art?
My last comment is Ed's website is really, really educational. PassiveHouseOntario.ca.
Wonderful.
It was voted the most outdated site in Ontario last year, so I'm very proud of that.
So, Wendy, can we hand it off to you or to your colleague? Or go ahead. Would you like to use it?
I'm a teacher. I can talk loud. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Jim and his team, George, for a very comprehensive and obviously very timely presentation, very well organized. And also to the panelists, obviously, Hart and Ed and Louise, that really added to the presentation to hear your experiences. I also wanted to say, just for Sustainable Milton, our next presentation will be October 26th. It'll be at the Country Heritage Park, which is just up the road here a bit. It'll be about farming in the urban shadow. So it's the challenges of farming that climate change presents and the urban sprawl that it presents too. We can register through Eventbrite, just like you did for this one. If any of you aren't on our newsletter subscription list, I urge you to sign up over there at the table. And I want to thank you all for coming. Without your participation, we can't continue to do it. And just one plug along those lines is that there's a donation box over there, if you're interested. And we have a couple of door prizes. Oh, here, what's up here?